Hi everybody. Welcome to this Chartered Banker Institute webinar on the importance of well-being and understanding burnout within finance. Just to remind everybody that we're recording the call today, as you heard. So the recording link should be made available to you within the next couple of weeks. And if you have a question as we're having this conversation, do please pop it into the chat and we will try to get to it by the end of the webinar. So my name's Dr. Evie Green, and I'm delighted to be chairing today's webinar. I'm not a banker, but I do have the pleasure of supporting and teaching students at the Manchester Metropolitan University, some of whom are probably going to go on and work in financial services. Also, despite being an accountant, I did contribute a book chapter to an Edward Elgar text that was published earlier this year, entitled How to Offer Wellbeing to Law Students. So it's quite clear this is a topic area that covers lots of different professional domains. And today I'm delighted to be joined by a fantastic panel of formidable women working in finance who have real expertise in this area. So before we make a start, I'm just going to go round to each panelist and ask them to do a short introduction. If we could start with Charlene and then move on to Anastasia, then Felicity, and then Laura, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Charlene, and I work in the HR team here at the Chartered Banker Institute. So I'm responsible for our HR strategy, engagement, and all things people, really.
Hi everyone, I'm Anastasia. I'm Head of Workplace Wellbeing for the UK arm of Mind Forward Alliance, and I like to describe myself as a mental health advocate who doesn't like having any spare time, because as well as my day job being rooted in wellbeing, I sit on 2 committees for the Samaritans, who are the UK's leading suicide prevention charity, and I'm also on the board of trustees for a small mental health charity called Inspire, who endeavour to provide accessible therapy to people who have barriers to facing it through other means. So really delighted to be here today.
Hi, my name's Felicity. My background was many years in leadership development in financial services, and over the last 3 years I have set up my own business working around executive coaching, but with an education, but with a specific focus on working with leaders who may struggle more with their mental well-being or are neurodivergent. One of my main passions is speaking around sort of the mind-body approach to mental health. So everything we've learnt through something called polyvagal theory. Some of you probably have heard about it because it's something that's getting out there quite a lot, but actually learning a lot more about the link between our mind-body connection and the things we can really put in place to manage sort of everyday well-being and our long-term longevity. So also very excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Laura Evans. I'm the CEO of Glass Ceilings, which is a people and culture consultancy. We specialise in breaking down barriers that people may face in employment or even to gaining employment. I'm a HR professional by background and have a long career dealing with sort of well-being and mental health in the workplace. I used to work for the Health and Safety Executive as well in policy. So that's my background.
Brilliant. Thank you all so much. So just to remind everybody of the themes that we're going to be touching on today, we'll be talking about how you recognise burnout, building resilience, promoting work-life balance, moving on to organisational support, and discussing sort of career longevity, and then hopefully, if we've got time, moving to looking ahead to the future. So they're the themes we're going to cover today, so we're going to get started. So the World Health Organization proposes that burnout is an occupational phenomenon. They acknowledge that burnout is the collection of symptoms and signs associated with both physical and emotional exhaustion. So my first question to the panel really is, what would you say are the early or the specific indicators of early burnout? Felicity, can I come to you first?
Yes. I think such an excellent question. And I think sort of from my background and the way I often think about my work is there's kind of two paths. So there's the mental health element, and I see that for many of us. I am somebody who's struggled with mental health sort of more throughout their life, and then there's the well-being element. And I think sort of through what I've learned about that, and I won't go into too much detail about the nervous system now, but what is exciting, I think, that we now know about it is that we know that it's kind of split into three parts. We have the kind of central part, which is when we're in presence, when we're in a really kind of good place. We have the sympathetic nervous system, which is like our kind of go part. And then we have the parasympathetic nervous system, which is our sort of our calming being part. And we need those two. But generally we want to live in a place of center. And what I've kind of learned around burnout is that for people who it may be something, so they haven't necessarily struggled with their mental health, but so this is something different, is what it tends to begin out as is almost these people have been in a place of anxiety for so long, and for so many of us in this population, we've been just go constantly. It's kind of the society we're in, it's the way organizations work. And actually what tends to happen is they've kind of lived in the state of go, and then they reach a point where they can't anymore. And then they tend to shift, as I say, into this parasympathetic part of the nervous system, but not in a good way, where they're just exhausted and overwhelmed. And whereas it's kind of different to depression. It's almost just a place of, I can't continue the state that I'm in. And then that will, evolve in things like insomnia. But I think it's really interesting. It's often that shift from being in a very anxious place to a place of, I'm really stuck and my mind and body aren't working to the state that they used to.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Any of the other panelists want to add to that?
I think what Felicity said is absolutely right, and I think it can creep up on people as well without them really noticing, because they may feel that it is just normal, or it's just how things work. So but in terms of indicators, I think it's not only psychological symptoms, but physical symptoms too. So as Felicity touched upon, the sleep disturbance, exhaustion, shortness of breath. It presents itself in different ways for everyone, I think, but I think not being able to switch off is a really big indicator for people that things might be getting a bit too much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Thanks.
I always say about change as well. Change is the key. If you notice changes in yourself or indeed in others, so that's the thing to look out for. And personality changes can be a key indicator as well. And often that's something that we don't always recognise in ourselves, and we rely on others to point that out to us.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a good point, that sometimes when you are burnt out, or those early indicators of being burnt out, actually it might be other people that recognise that in you before you do. So,
yeah, and I'd just add to that, I think, Charlene, that's a really excellent point. So that you mentioned not being able to switch off. I think that is a really often a keen indicator. And we see that almost people sometimes go a bit manic. It's just like go just before the kind of the disassociation. So I think that's a really important thing to highlight.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Thank you. So we've obviously kind of touched on the impact of certain factors, I suppose. And I think when we think about burnout, it's important to think about those systemic factors and how they might sort of contribute to burnout. So Anastasia, I was wondering if you might comment on what organisational factors you think that can contribute most to employee burnout.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, when the World Health Organization turned their attention to burnout, as you referenced earlier, I think that there was a lot of sort of flurry and interest in the academic and research communities, firstly to look at what we already knew about burnout and how we apply this, as a syndrome defined in the kind of occupational space. And also, I think it generated a lot of interest around kind of future research. What can we find out about this? How do we mitigate it? And I think generally the kind of academic consensus, and I think it's really important to try and kind of marry up what we know from the academic world and what we kind of see play out in the workplace. Academics generally have a consensus that the risk factors, so what organisations are doing that can contribute to people ending up experiencing burnout, look at factors like workload. So, is an individual's capacity suitable for what is expected of them, or does it mean that consistently they're being asked to do so much that it's really impacting on their ability to set boundaries, to be able to spend time looking after themselves, and also the emotional strain of how much you're being asked to do? It's also an element of control. So do you provide the autonomy for your people to be able to make decisions about what kind of projects and pieces of work are they engaged in, with the things that they have to do? Can they do it in a way that's suitable for them, for their working style? So that element of not feeling that you are in sort of an avalanche of work and you are being dragged along with no control over how and when that's happening. Reward is also really, really important organizational systemic aspect. And, it's, I think, in the current context of, economic turbulence, which is really impacting lots of businesses, it's really important to acknowledge that reward doesn't necessarily have to equate to the way that we pay people with financial incentives. It's around how you recognize when people are putting in effort, when they are developing, when they are contributing aspects of themselves to the work that they're doing and also to the broader workplace. So it doesn't just have to be about financial incentives. Reward and recognition structures can look in very different kind of shapes and forms. And actually very often they're about the human connection of being able to say, you know what, Iwi, you did such a great job on that. Let's share it with the team. I'm really proud of you. So that kind of constant positive reinforcement is really important as well. And then the sense of community is a really important workplace aspect as well, that is thought to be a protective factor and to mitigate the risks around burnout. So it's that sense of, do you feel that you are part of something that is bigger? Do you feel that you have that sense of a support network and a safety net and those relationships that you've built up across the organization? And that doesn't have to just refer to professional relationships, but also, the pastoral care that often we look for, when you've had a tough day at work, knowing that you've got someone to turn to and say, that was really tough and those meetings were really difficult, and having that sort of shared experience and knowing that you've got support from your colleagues. And the final one is fairness and values, and I think that this has a really strong thread through all of the things that I've just said. So fairness in reward, fairness in access to community, fairness around do you have control over your work, can you control your workload? But it's really that sense of, when we are operating in organizations, we're not operating in silo, we're not just sort of individuals within a vacuum, we are really impacted by the broader values of the organization. So do they align with our own values? And we know generally that when that happens, people are more productive, they feel more able to give more of themselves to the workplace, which is good for the individual and it's good for the organization. So that's what the academics say. And I think that when you hear it out loud like that, it really does make sense that those are the protective and also the aggravating factors for how we can ensure that people mitigate their risk of experiencing burnout in the workplace.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that, Anastasia. And I think it's a really good reminder of the collective responsibility that we actually have, and looking out for each other, as well as that idea of looking out for ourselves. So thank you for that. Laura, I don't know if you've got anything to add about sort of in your work, the specific signs that you might see in colleagues, as a manager, as a leader, with a team, whether there are particular things that we should be looking for in our kind of finance professional colleagues that would be indicative of burnout.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously, without wanting to ever overgeneralize, the vast majority of finance professionals I've worked with over the years tend to be highly driven, highly motivated, very professional, well qualified people, committed to lifelong learning as well, and driving themselves forward even post qualification, and also working in very pressured environments. All organizations rely on their finance professionals, so whether it's within a finance business or indeed embedded within an organization and running the finance function or working within it, so tend to take a lot of responsibility on their own shoulders. And the way that I've seen that manifest in finance professionals has been things like sometimes overthinking those changes that I referred to before, so changes in behaviour, things that maybe people felt a huge amount of confidence with previously, suddenly they overthink those things, or ask more questions, or want to verify things more. A tendency to hide any signs of feelings of burnout, particularly maybe when it's starting, or if available, asking to work from home a bit more often. Obviously pre-pandemic that would be more apparent. That's something to really be aware of now, in more hybrid working workplaces. You know, what does presenteeism look like, because that's a very early sign of burnout that I've observed. And then a main red flag would be then seeing sort of increased absences from work, and patterns emerging with that. So maybe the odd day off here and there, and then shorter periods of time off. And very often that's led to a longer periods of stress and well-being related burnout, absences. And obviously it should never get to that stage, really.
No, absolutely. Oh, thank you so much.
I would just add, because I find this such an important topic, Laura, and I think what you said there is so beautiful about not being able to speak up, and my experiences in financial services. And one of the things I am passionate about is mental health, particularly in men, because we know it's not such a generalization. We know it can be more challenging to speak up. So I really like how you highlighted that, and how sort of managers can make it a bit more of a culture of where we can be more open about these things. And I think, Anastasia, you brought in the academics, and we can talk about the science, but just so we can kind of, as much as we can, start to normalize this a bit more to make it more preventative.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So at this stage of the conversation, I'm going to sort of move into building resilience. And, you know, I think we often think of burnout as this cataclysmic event, when sometimes, as a lot of you have already described, you know, it can be a slow burn, and something that's progressive. And if I think to my own work, where I sort of do a lot of research with marginalised communities in particular, we've all talked about the importance of the collective, the alignment of values, what that can mean for sort of lived experience in these spaces. And, you know, those groups in particular will talk about the sort of cognitive gymnastics that they have to jump through just to navigate spaces on a daily basis that can contribute to that sense of burnout, and that by stealth in particular. So I was just really wondering, when we're thinking about building resilience, I think acknowledging the self as well as the system and the collective is really important. So I just wanted to ask a couple of questions related to that, really. So Charlene, to come to you first, if that's okay. What do you think are the individual strategies that colleagues can employ to kind of foster resilience?
I think it's very different for everyone, I think, and everyone very much needs to find out what works for them. Program of self-care, so making sure that you're going out for walks, getting fresh air, making sure that you've got a supportive network to talk to when times do get tough, and whether that is colleagues or people outside of work, as long as you've got someone to offload to. I think that's really important as well. I think a good relationship with line manager is key as well. I think poorly defined work tasks and lack of communication, or communication which is unclear, can be very detrimental to mental health, to burnout. So yeah, I think creating a good relationship and being open and honest with line managers is so important.
Thank you. Felicity, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that about the individual strategies that people can employ.
I love the conversation we had when we were preparing for EWE around the this self versus system, and it's been really interesting in sort of as my work has evolved, particularly with leaders. It's this understanding of what is self, and I think it's something that's being talked about more and more. This connection to sort of true self, what that kind of means. But what I found really interesting in my work is it's around kind of often helping the leaders understand sort of their values, their strengths. And when we say, you know, purpose can be a bit of a sort of word that means different things, but I think sort of what I have learned to understand around purpose is it's really who you are at your best. I mean, some people are very lucky, you know, they do jobs that they love, and that can be a purpose. But I think what I've found is that purpose, particularly for leaders, is them being their best selves around individuals, which then, as we know through, we've talked a lot around connection, right? And again, from what we're learning to understand about the mind and body, one of the other scientific bits that we talked about was now understanding about the three brains, right? So the mind, the heart, and the gut. And we know intuition is a thing, and the better we manage our well-being, the more aligned we are, and more naturally effective we will be. We will be as a leader, as a parent, as anything. So we kind of talk about this alignment of the system, but I think that then comes back to self. So the more you look after yourself, the more aligned you are as a person, and then the better impact you have on the system. And I loved how we talked about that in terms of our sort of passions for different types of diversity, but you know, having run different types of diversity programs and now understanding more about neurodivergence, but has been sort of actually, and we talked about this, and it would be really actually lovely to hear your perspective, but actually understanding much more deeply the diversity of the individual. So I think it's the really kind of individual perspective. And then the final thing that I wanted to say was understanding the split between the cognitive and the physical. So what again we're learning to understand is this regulation of the physical body, actually how we learn to do that. And there's 5 things I think about that are in terms of learning to breathe, movement, water, nutrition, sleep. But it's actually how do we physically, and as well as building on what Charlene said, was the cognitive element. So the second part, we've got this physical part, but the cognitive bit is actually cognitively learning to understand ourselves, and then starting to sort of merge the two to then be the best version of ourselves as we can be as a leader. Or as an
no, absolutely. Thank you. And I think we all sort of acknowledge that to do that, for people to sort of be empowered to have a good sense of well-being in space and to be the best version that they can be, that structures of support need to be provided by organisations. So Laura, coming to you first, and then maybe Anastasia afterwards. What would those structures of support, those structures of care that I think Anastasia referred to earlier, what would that look like in practice to sort of mitigate burnout risk?
So there's the specific things like, say, mental health first aider networks, specific people who are trained and known and promoted as go-to people within the organisation. One thing that we really advocate through Glass Ceilings is that all the people professionals, all the HR professionals working in the organisation, particularly anyone in advisory and caseworking roles, and certainly business partnering, the strategic HR professionals, they should all have well-being embedded within their ways of working. And then well-being itself shouldn't be a standalone thing. It is for everybody. So that should then be embedded through organisational strategies, through people strategies as well. And Charlene, you may have more to say on that also. So yeah, all policies and procedures need to embed well-being and think about those provisions that reduce impacts on people's mental health and well-being, and therefore can reduce burnout. The other thing is that line managers, they play a crucial role. So they have to know how to avoid people reaching burnout much earlier. It's too late when they get there, isn't it? So they should all be trained to spot the signs and to have the confidence to hold conversations as well with people in a non-confrontational and supportive way. But also everybody understanding the limits of their competence. And I think one thing is a lot of pseudoscience has come into kind of workplace measures for this, and I'm sure Anastasia, you can speak more about this, but everybody kind of pits themselves as a well-being expert nowadays, and actually if the burnout is straying into areas of mental health, mental ill health and mental health conditions, it can actually be more damaging for somebody if they've got someone who isn't an expert and on the medical side of things to offer those interventions. So yeah, mental health first aid networks is a really good bridging gap, but they are very much trained to signpost to proper avenues of support, and so that would be a key thing to also flag as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Laura.
Yeah, I think I agree completely with that. And I think just taking that thread of thought around what Laura was saying about, you know, the concept of well-being in an ideal world is that it's something that's threaded through everything that you do. It's not just HR or driving it, but actually it's everybody's individual and collective responsibility to look after themselves and others around them. And I think that you can create those sort of support networks and safety nets through education as well. So, you know, as Laura mentioned, there's no expectation that everybody in an organisation should be, you know, a qualified counsellor and able to provide that kind of intervention. But having the skills around basic things, which actually are, you know, harder than it may appear at first, like having a conversation where you're employing active listening and giving somebody the opportunity to really share what they're experiencing. You don't have to be able to solve those problems, but having the skills and the education to understand and spot the signs, okay, I think this person might be on the edge of burnout, or it looks like this person's mental health is in decline, and knowing what happens next. Who do you signpost to? Where is, you know, the frameworks, those kind of, you know, the policies, the, you know, offerings around where people can go next is really important. So I think there's something about, you know, and I think I appreciate the irony of saying this kind of, you know, in front of a lot of professionals from the finance sector, because I know that traditionally what we like is data and ROI and statistics. But I think that there is something about bringing it back to something that's very human centric, which is that at its core, we spend so much time and energy on our work and with our colleagues that we are really well placed just to be able to recognize that this is another human being who might be going through something challenging. What we can offer is a little bit of a safety net, a way to soften their fall without taking on too much, without, you know, impacting our own mental health, and then passing them on to the wonderful policies and interventions and counsellors that are available through, you know, the majority of finance sector institutions and employers. So I think it's cultural, it's sometimes the less tangible things around how do we make sure that our people are equipped to be able to have the initial conversations, to recognise the signs, and also to look after themselves as they're going through the process as well.
I love what you said there, Anastasia. I think that's such an amazing point around active listening, because I think we come from problem-solving backgrounds, particularly in financial services. And again, to link that back to your point, Laura, you know, there is this balance between, again, we've talked about well-being and then more severe mental health. And actually, what you need when you're struggling is someone just to kind of deeply listen. They're not, either you don't need them to solve your problem. And then, you know, you can then come to an agreement together around next steps. And I just think that was highlighted really well to line managers. So much is around active listening and slowing things down, and then almost the solution or what happens next will emerge. So I think, yeah, it's really good to highlight.
Just on that, and this isn't a question that was pre-prepared, so throwing a slight curveball here, but just based on what you've spoken about, because I do think a lot of what we've spoken about so far has been about the importance of connection. And as we've all just expressed really eloquently, those spaces where people can be heard. So active listening being really a really important part of that. I just wondered, across sort of your organisations or the work that you've done, whether you've got any tangible examples outside of kind of one-to-one meetings, or, you know, those formal spaces where we might have an opportunity to hear our colleagues or our peers, whether there's anything you've come across in your work where active learning is sort of centred in the space and is good practice.
I've certainly been involved with establishing sort of workplace engagement networks.
Okay.
So places where people can come together, and within that sort of diversity and inclusion networks as well, so feeding those two together, and then sitting beneath that maybe sub committees who are groups of like-minded people who maybe have shared things in common, those maybe things are very likely to be things that are impacting on their well-being and a sense of collective well-being in the workplace. And those things have worked very well because to speak to what others have mentioned, that sort of person-centric approach, it means that it is with everybody and everybody has that shared ownership. It's not being done to as a kind of corporate tick box exercise, and people really sort of respond to that investment in themselves, and just that underlying sort of being given the time to engage in those things as well, rather than getting the widgets out or the daily sort of work that they're engaged with. So they would be key things that I have seen work very well in other organisations.
Yeah, no, that's great.
I'd agree with Laura that I think that the D&I space is one where we've actually seen, you know, active listening and those sort of less formal opportunities and safe spaces for conversations to happen. It's taken off really well. And an interesting observation I have is I started my career in early careers recruitment, so looking after graduates, you know, right from attracting them through to watching them kind of develop and progress through the organisation. It's interesting because the way that we approach the entry into an organisation for people who are on formal programmes is really different to the way that we approach it to somebody who might be coming in as an individual hire. And I understand that it's for lots of logistical and practical reasons. But when you look at graduates or apprentices coming into organisations, there's a lot more embedded into the first sort of 6 months of their, you know, time in the organisation, which is centred around a sense of community and having spaces to talk and having spaces for somebody to listen to you. And I think it's a shame that often that ends after sort of, you know, when it's decided that they're not new anymore and suddenly, you know, we don't need to listen to them anymore and they can be like the rest of us. But equally that we don't do that for people who enter the organisations through other routes, because actually it's really valuable for the organisation to hear some of those perspectives. But in terms of what we were talking about, that sense of community being a protective factor from burnout, dedicating specific space for you to have to be able to socialize and be heard and to listen to your peers and to other people that are kind of brought into those conversations is so valuable. I advocate for that learning to be taken and kind of applied across other populations, demographics, and, you know, all employees should have the opportunity to engage with that.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you. It kind of leads me on to the next question, really. Sorry, did somebody else?
It kind of aligned to those, something that I heard that worked really beautifully recently, and it was inspired by and I would really recommend it. It was a program with Michael Sheen working with a conversation with autistic people, and he just, you know, asked me anything you want about my life, and it is really, really beautiful. And an organisation where, because a lot of the challenges, as we talked about, we hear as senior leaders struggle with this, and from my conversations with them, as much as the rest of us, if not more, because they've often had to suppress it to get to where they've got to, or it's not something that's ever been spoken about. And so one of the organizations I was working with was they had a couple of senior leaders who were like, you know what, I'm okay to be asked anything rather than have to present on something I don't really know about. And it was really great because these two senior leaders were in the room. The conversation was about mental health and well-being, and it just the comfort of them saying, you guys educate me, because we've talked about, you know, Gen Z are all over this stuff, right? They really are. And so it was this kind of dual process of, it was a very open conversation, and it really sort of relaxed the environment, and I would say led to a much more fruitful conversation than asking leaders to present. And so I think that's a really interesting way of leaders are possibly not always the expert, and how do we sort of balance this in organizations?
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Anastasia. Yeah, just such brilliant points in there. And I think it does lead me into the next question, which I'm going to put to Charlene initially. Then I think we've touched on this in the conversation, the role of sort of inclusive spaces. You know, you've all sort of spoken about within the collective different groups of people with different needs. and the strength that can be drawn from networks and the collective. And so, Charlie, my question is really about what your thoughts are about the kind of role of inclusive spaces in building resilience and fostering this sense of collective well-being.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important, and I think it's so important to have those supportive networks that you can rely on. I think if professionals have someone that they can turn to when they're overwhelmed or stressed, it makes all the difference. Even if they can't offer advice on the specific issue that you're experiencing, it's just good to offload and get things off your chest. And knowing you have someone to rely on like that can reduce stress levels.
Yeah.
I also find if you've got someone who can make you laugh, I think this is invaluable against stress and anxiety. I think that's a really important point. But I think organisations, they have to take responsibility to cultivate the right culture, and that means people can talk openly to each other, especially in a hybrid working environment. It's not always visible how someone's feeling because you don't see them every day in the office anymore. So even just picking up the phone to a colleague and asking them how they are, that can sometimes mean so much, and it's sometimes something that can get lost in a digital environment sometimes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Has anybody else got anything they'd like to add? Anastasia?
Yeah, so I think in terms of kind of those, inclusive spaces, I think what's really important to kind of remember, and what I think is important, as a takeaway for anybody that's listening in and thinking about, how do we apply some of this to our workplaces? I'm such a big advocate for the fact that wellbeing is not a one size fits all. I think when mental health and wellbeing first started to be something that was, we wanted to reduce the stigma, we wanted to get people talking, that first hurdle was, please, anybody talk about it. And now we've moved on so much that what we have to recognise is that talking about it, accessing care, accessing support, the barriers are different for different communities and demographics and groups, and that has to be reflected in our approach in workplaces. So, we've seen really great progress, organisations really trying to diversify their workforce, making sure that they are representative of the communities that they serve, and the wellbeing agenda has to move alongside that in parallel, because otherwise you are not giving the people that you are hiring the support and care that they need and deserve. So I think, providing those psychologically safe spaces is a really good way of offering those safety nets and offering those support networks that understand the specific barriers and opportunities. But as an organisation, it is such a wealth of knowledge. If you have not been through that experience, it's so difficult to imagine what are those barriers, how do you face them, how do you overcome them? Providing those spaces for people to have the permission to share their experiences equips you with so much information and knowledge on how you can shape that wellbeing agenda going forward. So, I think for an organisation, it's beneficial. For the individuals that make up the organisation, it's beneficial. So, I'm a really big advocate for, as wellbeing progresses, those inclusive, specific, safe spaces are going to be, such a catalyst in providing and fostering collective wellbeing that genuinely serves everybody in the way that they need to be served and their specific wellbeing needs.
Yeah.
Charlene, the one thing I'd say, I loved it when you talked about a sense of humour, because it just kind of lit me up, because I'm somebody who struggled with mental health for many years, and I'm very comfortable to make jokes about it, because it's, at the end of the day, there's a very, very serious aspect to this, but some of the experiences I've had through my mental health have been very strangely very deep and very beautiful, and I've met lots of different types of people, and and had very open conversations through naturally being more open. And I mean, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and somebody said, well, how did you kind of manage your career when you didn't know? And I realized that actually part of what was really helpful for me was my natural ability to sort of connect and to kind of laugh about things. But actually I realized what that did for others, and particularly some of the senior leaders that I coached and worked with, it gave them a safe space to then open up and talk about these things. And I think it's really beautiful, Charlene, is that actually we over seriousness, whatever the word is, mental health and well-being. We've made it very serious, and that is in many ways important. But I think I was talking to somebody the other week, what's the most important thing you can do to connect your mind and body is to laugh. And so I think there is something in a way of working in the culture of organizations of how do we get this balance between understanding it's a serious topic, but actually we're all human and we all need to work on our well-being, and we all know somebody who would have suffered more seriously with their mental health. And I think it's something a bit around this culture change that we need to think about.
Yeah, I agree with everything everyone said, and I won't want to repeat it, but one thing on the inclusion space is that well-being, mental health, burnout, it might not be that people express it in those terms. And something that I would always strongly advocate is to think well-being, to think mental health, to think burnout when we're engaging with people on sort of diversity and inclusion issues. So if somebody's been through a traumatic time, you know, think of the potential impacts on them that they may not be in a position to articulate, or may not be in a place of understanding that impacts on them, but in a way that doesn't assume that they necessarily will, or implies to them if you raise it is a sign of weakness, which it absolutely isn't. It's just a human reaction to things, but to actually think about those things when discussing diversity and inclusion issues that aren't necessarily framed in the mental health space.
Yeah, such brilliant points. That, as you know, that is a particular area of interest for me. So we could stay there for the next 40 minutes and talk, but we've got to move on. So thank you for those brilliant comments. I just want to move to sort of the promoting work-life balance. We've all spoken about the changes in the industry, the changes in the way that we work, even how we show up online. I know presenteeism was something that was mentioned earlier as well. And, you know, The Guardian reported 6 months ago that there was a pilot involving 61 organisations, piloting the 32-hour 4-day week. And they actually reported that 82% of the participants in the pilot reported a positive impact on well-being. So I just wanted to ask a question firstly. Laura, since you last spoke on this, maybe you'd like to pick up a comment about whether, you know, that surprises you that so many people did say the 32-hour week had a positive impact on their well-being.
It doesn't surprise me, to be honest, because I think for a long time now we've talked about, you know, overworking and working too many hours. It can lead people to feel prone to burnout, and not just on an individual level. Organisations can be prone to burnout. There's not much spare capacity if you are sort of working all those hours. How can you build and grow if you're not creating the space to do so? So no, not surprised at all by those results. One slight counter to this is what I and what we strongly advocate through Glass Ceilings is a truly flexible working, and imposing hours of work, you know, per week, per day, per week. That's necessary in terms of, you know, what people know they're employed for, what they're paid for, and all of that kind of thing. But within that is the, wherever possible, the ability to be flexible in how and when you work those hours, where you operate from as well, because that reduces further rigidity, and that can also help. So let's not make the kind of the 32-hour week or whatever it is into the new 37.5-hour week. Is what we would say on that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Laura. And Charlene, I know that that's something that's been brought in here at the Institute, the 30-hour work week. And I just wondered, from your perspective, how has transitioning to that impacted on employee, you know, well-being and the organisational culture?
Yeah, sure. So at the start of April, we moved to a 32-hour week. So we finish at 1 p.m. on a Friday. And it had been an idea that our interim chief exec had been thinking about for a long time, but we weren't sure how colleagues would actually feel about it. So what we did was we asked for feedback, and an overwhelming 95% of colleagues told us they would welcome the idea. So yeah, since it's been introduced, we've noticed many benefits. Our colleagues have told us they feel more productive during the working week. They know that there's a few less hours to get things done, so prioritisation is more important than ever before. And it helps with well-being because they have a chance to spend Friday afternoon either with their family, friends, or doing something that benefits their well-being. So the chance to switch off and start the weekend earlier has been invaluable for them. And I would say it's impacted our culture really positively. It's also a great selling point that we can use when recruiting new colleagues, and our current colleagues are really happy with it. But yeah, we have had to adjust to it. We've had to get used to everyone logging off at 1 p.m. And I think a key point is that we need to role model behaviours. So we can't be kind of sending emails. If you choose to work past 1 p.m, that's fine, but you can't be sending emails and expecting a response, or calling people and expecting a response. So it took a few weeks to bed in, but I think it's working really well just now.
That's great. That's great to hear. Thank you. A lot of what we've spoken about have been, as I say, changes in work practices. And we've obviously just heard about, you know, the working week being brought in at the Institute. Some of those changes have been kind of technology advances. And I just wondered if the panel have got any ideas about, you know, the potential opportunities actually that could be presented by advances in technology on sort of achieving this work-life balance in the context of all this change that we've seen. Anastasia.
Yeah, happy to make a start. I am really interested in this kind of intersection around technology and AI, and particularly well-being. I'm very delighted to say I'm not an academic, but I co-authored an academic paper at the end of last year, which looks at you know, what we can learn from the digital and AI world and how we apply it specifically to severe mental illness. But lots of those principles I think are applicable to when we think about the workplace, when we think about well-being, which is something that we all have, even if we're never diagnosed with a mental illness, whether it's severe or not. And I think that it's the capacity to take away some of the tasks which are time consuming, which are not necessarily providing us with a lot of value and meaning and purpose, and enabling us to open up those times that we then have available to actually really engage with the things that enable us to thrive. So I think in that workplace context, automation, I hope, and the use of AI, I hope, will enable us to ensure that the time that we are spending at work, we're really actually spending on the hard-hitting stuff that really empowers us, that really drives us, that makes us feel connected to the values and the outputs of the organisations where we're operating, while at the same time offering opportunities to provide access, I suppose, to some of the things that don't have to be provided by a clinician or don't have to be provided face-to-face, that mean that we have a bit more control and autonomy over our own well-being. So there's lots, you know, emerging around shifting behaviour and encouraging us to do the things that we know that we should be doing, like sleeping and eating healthily and doing exercise and, you know, spending time socialising and engaging with our communities. So I think I know that technology and AI is something that, particularly in kind of the labour market, instills a lot of fear. But I think that, like any new technology, like any advances that we've seen throughout history, it really is about how we employ it and how we use it. And I think that it has, you know, a brilliant opportunity to free up time for us to be able to do the things that give us purpose, and also to free up time from the kind of health perspective from professionals who often are swamped with, you know, tasks and, you know, very, very stretched, to be able then to focus on those moments where that face-to-face, that human interaction really is going to provide a safe and productive outcome for patients and for people that are seeking care and support. So I'm an optimist, so that's my hope for the future. I know there's probably plenty of people that will disagree, but I think that's something that I would encourage and advocate for us to strive towards.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Any other comments from Felicity and then Laura, perhaps?
Yes, I think there's 2 points I would make on that, and the first is to build on Anastasia's optimism, because I think there is a lot of optimism if we can think about technology properly. So the first thing I would say, and again we had a really interesting conversation around this last week, is what we're learning that obviously a lot of the AI will automate a lot of tasks. So actually it opens up in space in organizations to focus more on the people side, and we've talked about this again, the sort of the developing the connection to self, which a lot is, as we discussed, is really active listening, right? Things around empathy, things around gentle vulnerability, and actually and we talked again last week in the very forward-thinking organizations, particularly sort of the tech organizations, interestingly in San Fran, have been all over this. And so they have been for, I'd say, almost up to 10 years, have workshops around empathy, vulnerability, getting to know yourself. And actually, what's so wonderful about that in so many senses is it not only helps an individual's well-being, these skill sets, but actually it can make the purpose of a role much more interesting. So if the data's if the data's there for you, how can you then focus on your customer in a much more sort of empathetic, connective way, and your purpose or what you really enjoy around being more with people. The other thing I think is really interesting is we've talked a lot about overuse of technology, and we know that is an issue, and we know, particularly for children, but also for us, being on our phones all day long. And I go briefly into the science, but it's really bad for our dopamine system, which is why it is so addictive. And so that's why I'm so passionate. I say to people, try not to come off your phone and do movement or go and speak to someone, or even the benefits of yoga. I've only just started to get into yoga. I didn't know anything about it. The benefits it's had has been absolutely huge on my well-being. And so it's that balance again for organizations of the real positives of this for their people in terms of roles and the engagement, but also the education and I believe their role in people understanding how to manage it appropriately.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much.
And I think not to repeat anything, I completely agree with what's being said. Another aspect is this, fascinated by the kind of augmented reality and the developments in that sort of metaverse. That's revolutionising things like, or has the potential to revolutionise education, and that could be really easily applied into workplaces with training and development opportunities, but also the ability to kind of put on a headset and I think some hand gloves as well, and actually be in a virtual reality workplace together, even if you are kind of in different parts of the country or indeed working internationally. And that then helps with all of the things that we know are good for mental health and well-being, which is getting rest, not sitting on a train for 5 hours a day, commuting and working to attend a 2-hour meeting or training session, that type of thing. So that's another aspect on technology I would reflect on.
No, that's brilliant, and that speaks very much to me. I'm sure colleagues on the call will tell you that I'm forever moaning about my long commute and not being able to get onto the Wi-Fi and be as productive as I'd like to be. So I think that's an excellent example of how we could use technology to be more efficient, increase productivity, but also maintain that connectivity in sort of immersive virtual worlds. Thank you so much for that. So I just kind of wanted to move on to this idea of as well as all the change we've seen, the sense that we're having an aging population and what that means for career longevity, really. And you've all spoken about the responsibility of organisations, but there's also an intentionality that needs to come with that. So my question to you, I think I'll pose this to you, Charlene, is what are the strategies do you think that can kind of promote long-term career satisfaction and happiness, you know, in working in financial services?
Yeah, I think there's a few. I think overall it's about providing a really good employee experience. So this includes providing growth and development opportunities so that people don't become stagnant in their role, so that they're constantly learning. And as part of this, giving autonomy is really important. So giving people freedom to run their own projects, make decisions, whilst having someone to fall back to for advice is really important. And it gives people that sense of ownership and pride as well in the roles, and gives purpose and meaning to. And I think leaders have a role to play here as well. I think they can promote positive emotions. They can give people a voice, teaching resilience, how to cope with stressors, because there's always going to be stressors in the workplace, but it's about how people cope with them. And yeah, taking a strengths-based approach as well, where leaders line up the engaging tasks with individual strengths and interests, mixed in with the more mundane tasks that still need to be completed. So I think it's about all of that, and as well encouraging good relationships and collaborations amongst colleagues to create these support networks that we see are so important.
Yeah, thank you very much. Does anybody else have anything else they'd like to add to that before we move to the final question? Felicity?
I think it's such a good question. And again, there were two things I thought about, and one came back to this, I think, the purpose thing. And I think what's really at HSBC, we right at the end of my time there, they did sort of, it was almost like a retirement coaching, something that was introduced, but actually it was amazing because most people I work with at the latter end of their career want to give back, right? And actually it's really interesting in terms of what that giving back means. And I think, again, we've talked about the need for organizations to have a more of a societal purpose. We know that is where things need to evolve, and we know that's what Gen Z need. But actually for this, the kind of the latter stages of someone's career, it becomes more and more important. And I think, again, that's a chance for leaders to introduce that more in the culture, and that purpose bit can be, you know, supporting employees, it can be doing things internally, but a more purpose element. The other thing that then links back to the well-being is, as we know so much of the research, you know, we talk in many cases still about well-being as a little bit of a nice to have. You know, we know so much now about the link between well-being and looking after our body and the longevity of health in life related to everything. So, you know, it's things like cancer, dementia, heart rate. The science is all there. The more we look after our bodies in terms of, you know, as I say, and you just keep banging on about these 5 things, but why breath work is now becoming so important, movement, hydration, nutrition and sleep. And I'm very much a balance, you know, how do we do that in a balanced way? It's not about being perfect, but the science around looking after our bodies and the longevity of health in our lifetimes is huge. And that's something else with organizations. It's like, you know, the longer we continue at work, the more we really have to focus on our well-being. And I think, you know, just the power of even this conversation, Iwi, that you've organized, is how we can gently start to get these messages into organizations that this is
great.
It's really important.
Thank you, Felicity. Thank you so much. So I'm mindful we have 2 minutes left on the call, I think. I'm going to try and squeeze in a very last question. So if I could ask you to be really brief, but just one key takeaway, obviously, that people can perhaps think about in their own practice as they're, you know, in their roles as leaders or peers, friends, colleagues. What can we do proactively to sort of challenge the risk of burnout in our colleagues? Laura, can I come to you first?
Yeah, I'll be brief. Be part of the solution. Talk, open up, create that safe space, but be part of this.
Wonderful, thank you. Charlene?
For leaders, I would say communicate expectations clearly.
Brilliant, thank you. Anastasia?
Similar to Laura, I think it's role model the behaviours and the change that you would like to see.
Yeah, brilliant. And Felicity?
I'd say long working hours does not equate to success. We know so much now about productivity and working fewer hours in a day. So I research that, look into that, and think how you can sort of shift responsibilities within your team to make that
brilliant.
possible.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us on what I hope you have felt the same as me has been a really insightful and informative conversation about a really, really important topic. Thank you to the panelists for your expertise and sharing that with us. And I think I probably have about 30 seconds left. So I would say have a brilliant day, everybody. Look after each other and be reminded of the importance of community and connection in mitigating some of these risks. And thanks again for joining us.